Jen, you ever walked out of a store without a bag, like without a tote bag? You ever had that happen to you before?
Like, forgot my stuff?
Yeah, like, like with people nowadays, they bring tote bags into grocery stores so that they don't have to actually purchase plastic bags.
Yeah.
You ever
I'm
forgotten
not one
your
of those
bag?
people.
Yeah, so me, I'm typically one of those people that brings a tote bag, right? And
Okay.
there's just one time because, they passed this sort of law or ordinance that says you got to pay like 10 cents for a plastic bag. But I'm one of those people that cares about the environment, so I usually bring a tote bag. But there's just one time. This one time I forgot a tote bag, and I walked in, and it was an entirely different kind of experience. You do this sort of like walk of shame on the way out the door. Like, and you have people, you ever done that? Like where you walk out without a bag? I didn't even purchase a plastic bag. I walked out with the stuff in my hands, right? And I started getting all these weird looks from people. They're just like, giving me this look that was just like, what is this motherfucker doing with 6 gallons of lemon juice and some cottage cheese? You know what I mean? So they give you this like look, they kind of like shame you a little bit. They're like, what kind of wizardry is this guy up to?
I don't know because I don't carry tote bags. I never carried tote bags. Even when they passed that ordinance, I still didn't carry one. I always bought the plastic bags. But the reason why I bought the plastic bags is because I used them for other things. Yeah. And I like to have the plastic bags as like extra stuff for whenever, I don't know. I needed a plastic bag.
I'm not one of those people that even buys the plastic bag. So when I'm walking out with everything. Everybody looks at you like just robbed the place. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever actually paid attention to some of the things that people have in their carts at stores? I never used to be one of those people that does this, but I just recently started paying attention to the type of stuff that people...
I always look at people's carts and judge them silently. I do.
I never ever used to look at them, but I started. I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, you could potentially determine who's meant to be in your life and who isn't by being able to pay attention to what people have in their carts. Imagine if you were like a woman or a guy and you're just strolling along with your cart and you imagine like you meet your soulmate or your twin flame at Whole Foods, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have to like tell a story about how you met and you're just like, oh, I saw 20 containers of oat milk in his cart and I just knew that he was the one for me. You know what I mean? Like his love for oat milk just seems so familiar to me. I feel like I've made oat milk smoothies with him many times before. Like you could, I feel like if you're strolling along and you're looking at somebody's car, I feel like you kind of get a vibe for who they are,
Oh yeah, totally. And you can kind of tell single people by looking at what's in their cart. If they have a lot of like pre-made items and like single use type items, like stuff not to make big batches of food. Because when you're single, you don't really cook and make big batches of food for yourself.
That's true.
At least
I noticed that. It doesn't seem very cohesive. You know what I mean? It just seems like a bunch of just random stuff.
Yeah.
And I imagine maybe they're paying attention to the price, but then I see people that like, you look at them and they look like someone that can cook like a really good meal. You know what I'm saying? So like all the food that they have in their cart are just all produce and they're like wrapped up and they got a bunch of ingredients and like you have absolutely no idea what they're going to make. That's how like obscure the stuff in their cart is. You're like, wow, this guy's like an alchemist of food. You know what I mean?
Yeah. My carts look like that now that I'm married. But when I was single, it was like stuff for meal prepping. And I would meal prep and have prepackaged meals so I didn't have to do anything but just grab it out of the fridge and heat it up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. Life, crazy some of the things that you see just in regular life when you start paying attention to that stuff. But hey, on another note, you went to Burning Man, right? This is past Burning Man. We're recording this, but you had taken a venture up there. How did that go?
Yeah, it was great. This was one of my favorite years, I think.
Really? You've gone how many years?
Yeah, because this is number 6.
Damn.
So yeah, it's crazy. The years just kind of all blend together, but there are certain things about every year that kind of sticks out, right? And this year, it was not cold at night. And usually it is freezing cold at night, like bone chilling where your back, and your muscles in your back cramp up. It's like that cold.
Yeah,
this year it was super, earth cold. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
you can
this
feel
year
it from
wasn't
the ground,
earth cold. Yeah. Yeah, this year was super warm. There was a lot of dust storms this year, but what really stood out was because the last 2 years have been virtual, like virtual Burning Mans, and there was the Renegade Burns where it was just like random people showing up but wasn't put on by the organization. Yeah. So there were several years that people had time to create new art and create new art cars. So there were so many new art cars, so many art pieces. I mean, everywhere you looked, it was just like you're bumping into something. In previous years, it wasn't like that. So I really love that about this year's Burning Man.
Yeah, Jen sent me some video, and I saw it also on YouTube. But she sent me a video of some drones, and she was just like, drones are going to slowly take over the planet. Some of the stuff that they can do with drones is fucking crazy.
It's crazy what they can do with drones, like an average person can do with drones. Imagine what the military and our government and Secret Service can do with these drones. I mean, it's incredible. If you guys haven't seen it, look on YouTube, Burning Man drone show. It is insane.
Yeah,
thousands
if you
of
look
drones
at
creating pictures in the sky. It's like, whoa.
Yeah, the video that you sent me was just straight up like thousands of drones that were strategically positioned in this sort of area in the sky to look like a man's face. Like a man's face, or like the man walking in the air. You're able to create these huge, elaborate images, right?
Yeah. The eagle eye, or it was like serpent eye. I don't know. It was some type of eye. It was really cool. Yeah, no, that was great. So it was a really cool year. And talking to the people this year too, there were a ton of new burners. Every single person I talked to this year was like, "Oh yeah, it's my first year." So I thought that was really cool too. They undersold the event this year by quite a bit. Normally there's about 75,000 people there. But this year there was about 50 and a lot of new people. So
why did they undersell
to see I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
I don't know what the rationale was behind that, but well, I do know that they did away with a lot of the plug and play camps. And what I mean by plug and play are people who have a bunch of money that don't contribute anything to the organization, that just come in on their private jet, and camp's already set up. They have, a hairstylist, a chef, an RV already ready for them to go, and they pay, I don't know, $25,000, $30,000 for the week. So the organization kind of frowns upon that. So they shut down a lot of those camps. And
what I wonder what it is that
back on people.
during COVID and during the pandemic, they had the Renegade Burn, right? And as far as I understand or what I heard about it, the Renegade Burn was closer to how Burning Man was in the beginning, right? And I imagine that there were a lot of people that it brought them back to that time where they valued that type of culture a lot more. I imagine people that even worked at Burning Man went to that Renegade. So maybe that was just their attempt to bring it back a little bit to the roots of what they stood for. Because we had Valerie on the podcast a while back, and I was asking her this very question, what do you do about plug and play camps? Because they seem to operate entirely different. You have people that are spending tons of money with teams that are really committing a lot of their time to making these art installations work. But then you have these plug and play camps that are just let me just do all of this stuff because I have money, and it just seems to kind of get in the way of the ethos of what Burning Man stands for.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a place for everyone, right? But there are certainly extremes, and the type of people that come with those extremes are different, Yeah. So, I don't know. I don't have a fully formed opinion on how I feel about plug and play camps, because part of the magic of Burning Man is there's 75,000 people there just trying to blow each other's mind. That is that's kind of with the coolest, newest art car or the coolest, newest art installation, trying to out creative each other. Yeah. So, and it's expensive to do that. So, the money has to come from somewhere. But a lot of these camps and a lot of people that do these mega installations do a lot of fundraising and regional burns and things like that to raise the money in order to complete their projects.
Yeah.
So there's
I saw Android Jones, the Android Jones artist. We probably, you guys probably know who he is. Or he did an amazing, phenomenal art installation that was it looked like a moon with all these different LED lights on it. Did you get to see that? Like a crescent.
Yes. That thing was so cool. That was one of my favorite art cards this year. Very cool.
Yeah. So do you have any, because you've been to Burning Man several times, do you ever get any insights that you took away when you came back from that experience?
Listen, I think after the first 2, 3, you kind of know what to expect, and you know what you're getting yourself into, and you're each year you come a little bit more prepared. You come a little bit more prepared, and the preparation for Burning Man, you can't underestimate it, because something always goes wrong. Every single year is a lesson in overcoming, some kind of trauma or adversity.
Yeah.
And, like our first year, for example, we lost the electricity in our RV. We lost our generator. So we didn't have, AC or lights after day 2, which also meant we didn't have heat. We didn't have anything, right? So we were basically in this box out in the middle of nowhere. And it was 115, 120 degrees inside our RV during the day. And that's, that wasn't the plan, right? But you're out there in the middle of nowhere, and we couldn't fix it. So, that was year 1. And then on the way home, we actually lost our brakes. Our brakes caught on fire. And, so year 1 down, there's, the first year of expensive problems and adversity that you just kind of have to figure out. But there's always something like that. Every single year there's something. And it's a good lesson in patience too, Yeah.
It just shows you how strong you are, because when you're going against the elements, everybody that I talked about Burning Man, they say it's not a comfortable and it's not an easy experience, but somehow it shows you how adaptable the human being is to elements like that,
For sure. It's
when you
extreme
came
heat
back
and extreme cold. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you came back, you're there for a week pretty much. Did you have any trouble or integrating back into society after something like that?
Yes and no, right? I think, and it speaks to how many times I've been to. Every year, I never want to come home, right? I'm like, I wish Burning Man lasted another week,
Right.
But now I'm kind of I start to stay out. I'll come in a little bit earlier. I won't stay out as late, the last couple nights that we're going to be out, just to kind of slowly bring myself back into reality. Because it's hard. It is hard reintegrating whenever you get home. You're like, oh man, when you're at Burning Man, you're with 75,000 other people that are really similar to you in a spiritual sense, right? That are, want to raise the vibration of the planet, want to have a good time, want to, experience this childlike love and, love for one another, love for art, love for each other. It's a really beautiful thing. So I don't know. I don't know that I really have words for that. The first couple of years were really hard. And then as the years kind of went on, I just kind of prepare myself a little bit better to come home.
Yeah. And I think also there's something to be said about that sort of energy. You've gone through it so many different times that it's sort of emboldened itself in your life, so that when you come back into society, you just have more of that love to give to other people. You know what I mean?
And I feel I'm a different person now. Yeah, I'm a different person now too. The Jen that went for her first time 6 years ago, wasn't nearly as spiritual or as connected or in flow as I am now. And I think that has a lot to do with it too. As I've changed over the years and I've moved more on this path of spirituality, it's more part of my everyday life, and it's not such a huge stark contrast like it was before.
Right, exactly. It may have been a shock in the very beginning, right? You might have gone through that sort of post Burning Man depression, because you're seeing two polar opposite sides of how the world work, and then you come back into society and you're just holy shit, things are absolutely different. But after a while, you kind of get the hang of it, and I think that sort of getting the hang of it is just you've integrated that side that you've sort of explored as Burning Man into your everyday life, and so you're sort of I imagine you're carrying it out in everything that you do in regular life.
Yeah, exactly.
That sort of radical self-expression, that type of spirituality and that awareness, it kind of just stays with you after a while, and it just becomes a part of your everyday life, right?
Yeah, you start to integrate small things that you learn at Burning Man into your everyday life, and that's something that I struggle with too. Is having more fun. I tend to be a really serious person, so whenever I'm out at Burning Man, I can have as much fun as I want to have, and really kind of overdose on fun. But
overdose on fun. I love that.
Overdose on fun.
And it's good that we're actually talking about this, because the whole topic of the podcast that we wanted to focus some energy on today was just how our life changes once we have experiences like Burning Man, for example. I would say that is sort of like a textbook kind of spiritual experience for a lot of people. There are people that aren't necessarily spiritual that go to Burning Man, but everybody that I know, there's a spiritual component to it. And if you're able to extract that spiritual component, bring it back into your life, it changes you, right? It changes you. So we wanted to spend some time on the podcast today talking about how it changes you, like how spirituality changes you, how enlightenment changes you, how awakening changes you in terms of your relationships, in terms of your friendships that you have in life. Because those are where you're going to experience some of the biggest changes, because those are things that sort of kind of provide you with feedback. And, those connections that we have are, I guess, the more pronounced things in life that we can catch on to. So wanted to talk about how life changes in terms of our friends. Has life changed for you, Jen? Like, you've been on this path for quite some time. Have you ever, I know that this is probably like a really, really loaded question, but since you're on that path,
sure.
how has that sort of thing molded you and your relationships?
Oh my gosh. Like, are you talking about spiritual awakening and what happened? Because I pretty much lost everything.
Yeah.
I lost my business, my boyfriend. Yeah. Like everything.
Yeah.
I didn't lose my job, thankfully, but that was the only thing that I kind of held on to. But everything else kind of went to shit, but in the best way. I could feel it coming though. I could feel this call to something greater and that there was something more out there for me. And as I was following my heart and following my spirit, other people in my life just started to fall out of resonance,
Right.
Like
right.
we were vibrating on different wavelengths, and those people just started to kind of fall out of my life.
Right. And that is the piece that I think we wanted to talk about today, because that's a really important piece. It could also in some ways be a really misunderstood piece about the whole thing, because the whole idea is that once these people sort of start dropping out of your life, that you just become this sort of lonely, solitary person. That may be the case, but it's not a negative thing, right? So talking about these changes that happen in enlightenment, that sort of natural crumbling away of untruth tends to cause this sort of like rapid change in your life, where suddenly the people that you're used to corresponding with, maybe even people that you grew up with your entire life, just suddenly don't fit into your life anymore, right? So how do we go about moving through life when things like this happen? And I think that's what we wanted to talk about. But before we get into that, just to kind of give you a brief overview leading into this whole thing is like, okay, well, if it's going to change our life in the way that it does, well, what exactly is enlightenment, first of all? Like, what exactly is awakening, right? I would say, it is a very complex thing because it's very personal to each person, but the fundamentals are pretty much the same. It is this sort of sudden, gradual recognition of our true selves in contrast to our ego, right? It's like you're creating space. Suddenly there's something inside of you that awakens that isn't your brain, that isn't your ego. It's not this false image that you have of yourself. Suddenly through some, trauma that you go through, it could be through pain or loss. It could even just be through your own spiritual practice of experiencing joy and love. Suddenly you get this feeling that there's something else inside of your body that isn't your mind, right? Mm-hmm. And once that awakening happens, that is earth-shattering in itself, because one day you realize that you're not who you think you are, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's crazy because you'll hang out with somebody for the last time and not even really know that this is the last time that I'm going to be hanging out with this person,
Oh, yeah.
It's, yeah. So what was your awakening like? What was your experience?
It's a collection of different experiences that I've had, right?
Yeah.
And I won't go too far into every single one of them, because literally, Jen, I'll talk for like an hour about every single one of them, right? But I've had awakenings through the gradual or even just sudden awakenings through meditation, through plant medicine experiences, through reading one passage in a book that invoked one of the most serious panic attacks that I've ever had in my life. Right.
Wow.
It was this book that I read where I was just reading this passage, and I can't remember exactly what the passage was, but there was this surge of energy that went through my body. One can say that it was like a Kundalini awakening, but this energy surged down my back up into my third eye, and I freaked out. And of course, this was at the very beginning of my spiritual awakening. I didn't know exactly what was happening, so I thought I was going to die, right?
Yeah.
You experience this out-of-body type of experience, and then you kind of, it causes you to go in this quest to find out exactly what happened. That is just an example of one thing that happened. There was also another time where I was like sitting down watching a documentary about Sri Ramana Maharshi, the sage of Arunachala, right? And it was just a documentary about his work. And he's one of like I guess the most well-known when it comes to Advaita Vedanta Hindu spirituality. They called him the silent prophet. He didn't talk very much. Anyways, I saw this documentary of his, and it was so engaging because a lot of it just entailed his interviews with his followers or people that have actually met him in real life, and just hearing the experiences that they went through just sitting in front of this guy for like an hour and a half to 2 hours. I started to feel what they possibly would have felt at the feet of the master in India when they were with him. And I felt this feeling that I've only felt on plant medicine, on psilocybin. I've only felt that in that time. This happened naturally without any of that. There was something that opened up in me, and it felt like this nectar shooting through my body. And it felt like I was a flower that was starting to bloom. And even that freaked me out because it was a samadhi type of experience that was so strong that I just didn't know what to do with myself. I literally thought I was going to explode with bliss.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
That's cool.
If you can kind of contextualize that, experiencing so much bliss that literally your body can't even handle it. You know what I mean?
Wow.
It was just, yeah. So maybe we can have another podcast where I talk about all these little awakenings, but when something like that happens, whether or not it's a sudden or a gradual type of awakening, it sort of, it shocks you in a way where you start looking at life differently, right? It is a crumbling away of illusion and untruth, and mostly everything that we imagine to be true about life. You start to realize that everything that you think about life is something that is really just contextually understood with your mind, and something that is more or less probably inherited by somebody else. And so nothing about what our mind tends to hold is really original. Like, it's all recycled information. And so once you get to that point of recognizing that everything that you think is ephemeral and really is just subject to the elements of nature because your brain houses that information, there's this recognition of something else, right? Just something else that isn't affected by all of that stuff. And that changes you. You know, it's a deeply humbling experience when you realize that you're not the center of the universe. You know what I mean? Because,
That's for sure.
you know, because we only believe that like, we everything that we believe about ourselves is perceived from the ego, right? So it naturally, you feel like everything is about you because you're this vantage point looking out into the universe. But once a spiritual awakening strips away that ego, even if it's for a small period of time, there is no division between you and other people. And you realize that you're not at the center of the universe. Like, you are the universe, but with everybody else, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's basically this sudden recognition of union between all things, right? And it seems like a very fluffy thing to say, but until you experience what that really is like looking into somebody's eyes and literally not seeing them, not seeing that person or their name, you're literally seeing God look right back at you. And you're literally seeing God look through your eyes, looking at them. And in that moment, if you happen to be in a room with one person, there's only one force in that room with you. You know what I mean? There's just God looking at God. And there's no you, there's no them, there's just one force. And that can be a very earth-shattering thing to experience if you're not prepared to, you know, allow your ego to just disappear for a little bit and actually experience the vastness of God. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know, I didn't have like a super profound experience like that. It was
doesn't have
gradual.
To be. Yeah.
Yeah, it was totally gradual. It was more like a slow burn of, you know, this like desire and almost like this weird fixation I had with knowledge. Like, I had to just learn more and I had to have my questions answered, and I just had to know, you know, what's really fucking going on, you know? And
what's really going on?
I'm not just talking about like, I'm not talking about politics, not like that. Like I was, what's really going on with the universe, right? Like how did I get here? Why am I the way I am? Why was I put in these situations? Why did I overcome them to get me here to this place where I am today? You know?
Yeah.
It was just like more of a thirst for knowledge. And then the more knowledge I had, the more things started to manifest in my life more quickly. And then, you know, once I realized the key to manifestation, then that just like opened up a whole nother door of spiritual activity, you know?
Yeah.
So
that
I didn't have this like, I don't know, like major aha moment.
Like, that seeking is in my mind just as major as an aha moment, because the seeker inside of somebody isn't just a desire to want to know. Like that is driven by love, right? The main moderating force inside of you that wants to know what life is all about, that's driven by love. That is a force, I think, inside that every single person has that awakens up, that awakens within them at some point. And that's when you start asking those types of questions, right? Because there's whatever, even if it happens to be the most insignificant thing, there's something that happens in your life that causes you to start questioning, like, what is this all about? You know,
Yeah.
like that is hardwired into humans. Like I think that every single person gets the opportunity for that. And the people that are just a little bit more diligent or you know, want to see what it's about will start paying attention to that energy. You know, I think it's what I'm trying to say is it's built into the fundamentals of being human at some point. Maybe it's a part of our, you know, like our ability to just be self-aware. Something starts asking questions, you know. That seeker is like a very, very normal part because that seeker will lead you to that place of like those sort of big, profound changes. But it doesn't have to be some crazy nirvakalpa samadhi experience. It can just be something like an awakening can happen by just being outside and staring at a fucking tree. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like it can be that's the paradox of the whole thing. It can be a huge event or it can be a seemingly small event that is really fucking huge too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
looking at a tree and seeing the way that it moves. Or, I mean, if you've ever had like a plant medicine experience, you know, you're looking out in nature. It's insane that the fact that it even exists at all, right?
Mm-hmm. And how it all interacts with the environment and with each other. Every blade of grass, every leaf, every flower, every molecule, everything. It's amazing.
Everything works together. Like the one thing that I noticed that awakening, that enlightenment tends to do is it strips away all definitions that we have of things, right? Because the awareness inside of you, the spirit inside of you recognizes that all the definitions that you have of everything in life are man-made, right? Definitions of things only exist because we want a sense of control in a really, really crazy unknown world. It gives us a sense of grounding in our environment. And it's good things. It's good that those definitions exist, but we get lost in categorizing things. Like we get lost in definitions of things. And when you get lost in definitions, eventually you stop seeing the nature of what you're looking at and you're seeing definitions instead. So one thing that I noticed about enlightenment is once it's stripped away all of those definitions, once I realized that everything that I was categorizing was something that was moderated by the ego, that drops away. And the only thing that's really left is you're looking through the lens of your eyes like a child would. It's like you have no idea what anything is. Like you can go outside, you can see a tree, and even just the fact that I'm calling it a tree is me falling into that same behavior, right? So if you go outside and you see something that you thought was a tree isn't really a tree, it becomes really alien. You know, it's like you don't know anything about this thing, but it's been here for a long time. You know, like everything becomes so ancient and so sacred. And you're just like, wow, this is really, if you look at a tree from that perspective, everything becomes alien shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, dude, trees are alien shit. It's crazy how they communicate through their roots with other trees and
exactly.
You know, it's nuts.
Like
and how they can pass nutrients to each other. And, you know, if a tree's dying, all the other trees can, you know, resurrect them. It's fucking crazy.
Exactly. So enlightenment is just this sudden awakening of something deeper inside of you. And if you are on that path and you're listening to this podcast, you probably already experienced something like that before, right? So you know what we're talking about. So how does enlightenment change us? And of course, this is very personal for everybody because everybody's experience is so different. But again, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already have an idea of what enlightenment is and also how it's changed you. But there's a few things that I just want to point out, right? It allows us to be a little bit more intuitive and more hyper aware of our behavior in our environments, right? It allows us to perceive the true motivations of people. Like if we're going to be talking about how our relationships change, you're able to see things in a really simple way. You know when someone's coming from love and you know when someone's not coming from love, right?
Right.
And so it allows us to perceive the true motivations of other people, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
That's something, and that's a really good point. That's not something I've ever really given much thought to. But yeah, it does. It does open up like a new sense of empathy.
It's true because, the one thing about love, like when I said that you're able to see who's coming from love and who isn't. Love is not one of those things that's moderated by ego. Like love is an energy that expands and grows. So it's really one of the most true emotions and feelings that we have, because love is how we're optimized to feel. Like we operate the best when we're being loving, and we can see how our life falls apart when we're not being loving. And so once, enlightenment strips away all of this sort of illusion of ego, you're left with, you either love or you don't, right?
Yeah.
The human being is being loving or they're not being loving. So when you go and you're interacting with other people, you're not coming to the conversation with motivations. Like you're not trying to get something from them. You're not trying to, get money from them or get some sort of favor. Like your relationships become very, very simple and straightforward. There's either love in this relationship or there's not, right? And so that's how I feel like when you, how it changes you is that when you have conversations with people, you know who really wants to know who you are and who doesn't, like, who really wants to spend time being your friend and who doesn't.
Yeah. That's something that I kind of discovered was, is there honesty in this relationship? Like, am I being my authentic, honest, true self with this person? Are they being their true and authentic self with me? And the answer to that was no in a lot of cases. And I had a few friends fall out from that because, and I think a large part of that, it's not like I was doing that on purpose, right? It's just, I didn't really know who I was. I didn't really get it yet. Like I was still just trying to figure out like where my place was and how I fit into the world and what made me happy and kind of what made me tick. So I was trying out all these different things that just were, not in resonance.
And that has to happen, right? Because that's just what the ego does, right? The ego is compiling information in order to figure out like who it is, who it wants to be. But the one thing that I noticed about like awakening is that once your life becomes a lot more simple, you start to notice like all of the things that aren't you and all the things that are. Like a lot of the relationships I noticed, like when they started to drop away, it was because I no longer needed anything from anybody. I no longer, and in that, I guess that can kind of easily be looked at in a negative way. It wasn't that like I didn't need friends. It was more of the fact that I couldn't offer what it is that they wanted from me anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like they either wanted you'll notice that a lot of relationships or friendships that we have are motivated by this type of give and take. Like, what can you give me? What can I give you? Like there's some sort of transactional nature behind it, right? I'm talking about like friendships and relationships prior to some sort of spiritual awakening. Of course, you have a fair share of people that you love and people that you have authentic relationships. It's not like you don't have authentic relationships unless you've had an awakening, but you'll notice that you're a lot less willing to put up with inauthentic relationships after you have, reached a certain place in your spirituality. And because you don't need a whole lot from zero. And because you don't need a whole lot from your friendships, right? You start to actually notice the true motivations of the friends or the people in your life. Like you start to, you're able to notice, like if you're operating from love in your relationships, in your friendships, all you want is just a loving correspondence with somebody, and that person isn't willing to give that to you because you're not giving them, whatever it is that they want, whether it's monetary or some sort of opportunity or whatever, like those things just sort of naturally drop away, and they become also less interested in you too, when they feel like they can't gain something from you, right?
Yeah. And the other part of it is that your interests change, and you stop connecting with that person because you're not interested in what they have to offer anymore. And then, as soon as there's no interest, there's no relationship. It's bizarre. And it's bizarre how quickly it happens too. Yeah,
it definitely is. I mean, there's so many things that we can talk about how enlightenment changes us, right? Enlightenment means to sort of lighten our three-dimensional loads so that we can live a more simple life, right? Both emotionally and physically, right? So it illuminates a lot of things. Like I noticed that you really no longer feel a need to chase things like wealth or recognition or popularity, because in a lot of ways we stop relying on material things or relationships for our happiness. We'll notice that prior to that, maybe some of our relationships existed as a way for us to just sort of like rely on other people for our happiness. You know what I mean? Like we rely on other people to maintain something that we should maintain ourselves. And then once we experience something really profound, we start to love ourselves. You know what I mean? There's something in us that causes us to not rely so heavily on relationships or be codependent on them, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
the codependency, that's a whole nother topic.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, how enlightenment changes us, you know, we no longer feel the need to impose our beliefs or ideals on others. You know, I realize that every journey is definitely unique, and I allow people to believe what they want to believe. You know, I became less interested in trying to impose, you know, my beliefs on other people. And, you know, I think it's because it allows us to see others as ourselves. And there's, you know, really no separation when you're looking at it through the lens of unity, because you're outside of this scope of duality. You're like, you're not playing that game anymore. Right. So these are just some examples of how enlightenment changes us. Your story may be very specific to you, but you kind of get an idea. You start to awaken to something much deeper and something a lot more simple. And so how do our friendships change after awakening? Right. And I noticed that if we're going kind of from the beginning, many people will support you in your journey, but there will actually be people that discredit your spirituality as like phony or fluffy bullshit. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but
oh yeah, you know. Oh totally. And that's another reason that, back to point one, why I wasn't interested in trying to change people's mind. I knew that they weren't ready to receive the information. Like they're not ready to hear it. So I could talk all I want, but it wasn't going to stick. It wasn't going to resonate. So kind of what's the point? Right. And yeah, and that's it. You know, they just think you're crazy.
Yeah. I mean, in those people, obviously those are the people that find their way out of your relationship as you kind of start to evolve and venture along. But I wanted to actually talk about this because I did face a fair share of people that discredited my spirituality as phony and fluffy hippie shit. But I think this happens with good reason in a lot of ways, because I feel like in spirituality, it's kind of been largely westernized in our culture as a type of lifestyle brand, right? And I have some strong feelings about this because I was a part of the community prior to this happening. It seems like nowadays it's become something more of a lifestyle type of brand. And the spokespeople at the helm of these sort of communities tend to be these sort of fanatical, flamboyant types that tend to bring the sense of, I want to say, false exclusivity into the spiritual community, right?
Yes.
And those people tend to be the loudest people in the room. One thing that I noticed about the community is that you have two types of people, because I thought about this, like, why does spirituality bring out these almost type of like narcissistic types in the community? They are in a lot of ways the reason why normal people look down on the spiritual community, because these are the people that are the loudest people in the room. So I thought about this. There are two types of people that get into this type of community, let's just say. Maybe not into the work, but in the community. Is that you have people that are wounded, or do you have people that have done the wounding, right? So I would just say people that are wounded, these are the types of maybe empaths, HSPs, sensitives, codependents, trauma victims, things like that. You can find a fair share of people that are looking to heal from wounds in the spiritual community. And then you have the people that have done a lot of the hurting to other people, right? The ones that have done maybe some of the wounding to other people. These can be narcissists, people with borderline personality disorders, people that are on the spectrum type of personalities, right? And so you have this collaboration that takes place, right? And I've noticed, just from my own experience with others, because I've been in the community for a long time, it does attract some type of narcissist type of people, right?
Oh yeah.
Once they find their grounding in spirituality, they quickly tend to possess and control it, whether it be to try and monetize it, bastardize it into, you know, a teaching that they can manipulate people with, or, you know, the monetizing thing is a big piece. But anyways, the reason why I'm talking about this is they become the loudest people in the room in most cases. And I think this is the reason why when you tell somebody like your family or your friend, like, hey, I'm going down this path of spirituality, they automatically think of these crazy fanatical people on Instagram or social media that are making it seem like a fucking carnival. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't blame people that discredit my journey when I told them about it. You know, you just sort of like allow those people to just believe what they want, but I don't blame them for feeling that way. You know what I mean?
I feel like every subculture has that though. Like,
oh, for sure.
You know,
Absolutely.
even Christianity, like you have the evangelical, you know, churches where, you know, people are speaking in tongues and being healed and shaking on
For
Sundays. Sure. I mean, I mean, there's
100%.
There's those types of people in every single subculture.
Exactly. You have those fanatics in Christianity. You know, that's when I tell people, like, and people have this sort of, they create this false narrative that if you're in that spiritual community that you just have to be a perfect person. Like, you don't. Right? But you do have a responsibility once you enter into it to at least try and be a better person than you were before. Right? Mm-hmm. But it just shows you how, regardless of whether you look spiritual or act spiritual, like your ego, those tendencies that you came in there with can still find their way in the community somehow and still take advantage of people, hurt other people. I mean, you hear about this all the time. Like, I've spoken to more people that were considered empaths that have been in relationships with narcissistic people within the community. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, for sure.
And it attracts those types because you have two polar opposite sides being attracted by something that speaks to wanting to heal this sort of trauma from both sides, wanting to be healed from somebody that has been hurt and wanting to heal from somebody that has done a lot of hurting to other people. So there's just this synergy that happens. So it's like, just like anything, like you said, it has its own craziness to it. So we got to pay attention to that, right?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, so you made a good point about spiritual people having to be perfect. And, you know, that's why it's called a practice. This is a spiritual practice because you practice every single day. It's not perfection every single day. It's a practice. And it's hard. It's hard to live up to that expectation that, you know, you always have to be in a good mood and we did a whole podcast on this, you know, what it looks like to be spiritual. Like you're going to have your bad days. And that's okay. And it's okay to, you know, kind of slip back into your human emotions. Like that's normal. It's how you deal with it from there. Do you let it, you know, fester? Do you let it, you know, ruin your whole day, mess up your relationships? You know, no. You've just got to get a hold of it and realize where that anger and that pain and that fear is coming from, and then manage it from there.
100%. It's like you said, how you have a hold of it. Like it's you still go through the struggles in life, right? You still go through the same types of suffering. I mean, just because you're enlightened doesn't mean that you're never going to have your heart broken again. It doesn't mean that you won't experience pain. Alan Watts says that all enlightenment is a reevaluation of common sense. Because most of the time, people live their lives not really thinking about their behavior or whatever it is that they do, right? But, and somebody might say, well, I'm like, no. I'm talking about like a really, really deep awareness of how your behavior comes across in life. And that deep awareness is, can you distinguish and differentiate between who you are and what the ego is? That's the only difference between us and somebody that isn't spiritual. Is somebody that's spiritual, they can feel within their being that there's something else inside of the body that is not the ego. And once you get your grounding on that, the ego becomes a tool. And if you're able to use your ego as a tool and not allow it to control you, naturally, if you go through any type of pain, you'll get through it really fast, right? The amount of time that you suffer is condensed to such a smaller magnitude than somebody that is asleep that doesn't even realize that they're causing and perpetuating their own suffering and extending it as longer than it needs to be, right? So being hyper aware, that's all it is.
Yeah, it's being hyper aware. God, I look back on my life and all the times that I was just like really suffering and really wallowing in my own self-pity. And I was like, man, I was so asleep. I just had no idea. I had no idea. I didn't have the tools. I didn't even know what to do to change my circumstance.
Right. And then once you awaken, you realize that like it's your ego confused. Like you're trying to resolve your confusion with an ego that is creating the confusion, right? So it's like you can't use the same tool that is driving you crazy in order to heal. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like your ego is the cause of your suffering, but then we use the ego to resolve the suffering. That creates even more suffering because the ego is not designed for peace. Like it's not designed for that sort of spiritual freedom that you're looking for. The best thing that you come to terms with eventually is that you just got to leave that motherfucker alone. You know what I mean? Like you got to just leave your mind alone and allow it to do what it does and just go on living your life, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I just have a little sidebar comment because I hear this a lot in the spiritual community too, that like, oh, you know, once you dissolve your ego completely, it's bullshit. You can't dissolve your ego completely. Like you need your ego to live. So if anybody tells you that, they are 100% full of shit. That's
100%. Because if you didn't have an ego, like you would have no idea how to eat food. You wouldn't know how to wipe your own ass. Like you couldn't put gas in your car. You couldn't have a job. Like there is a necessity to having it, but you have to understand how to use it correctly, right? Rule number one is it's not you, right? Rule number two is that there's something else that is inside of you that can control that. And, you know, the ego is a very, very useful tool when it's looked at as a tool. It's not a useful tool when it's confused with who you are. It just gets confused. You know, it's like when you start asking really fundamental questions about the universe, like you just get confused and stressed out, right? And you're like, oh, I'm so confused. It's like, no, your ego can't figure out who God is because your ego is not designed to understand who God is. Your ego is designed to keep you alive, to feed you, to clothe you, to help you just move around life in a comfortable way. But the reason why I feel like a lot of people are confused is because they're trying to use this organ inside of their body that isn't designed to do all of those things. Like give it a break. Like just give it up and allow it to just do what it does well and just keep you alive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking to how our friendships change after awakening, there will be people I notice that don't want to accept that you've changed for the better. Because in a lot of ways, and I've noticed this too, people that don't accept your spirituality, even if you tell them that you're more loving or you're doing things differently, you notice how like they're committed to seeing you the exact same way. Because in a lot of ways, they're afraid to see you in a different way. Because in a lot of ways, that means that they have to change how they see you.
Right.
And you know what I mean? Like in some ways, it means that they have to change their life. And a lot of people aren't committed to doing that. People are so, they're so stubborn in how they see other people. Like they would rather commit to seeing you as this suffering person so that they can be the master over you or that they can feel superior to you, right? People get offended when you actually start to care about yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. And I also think that there's a weird jealousy too. They're like, why is this person so fucking happy all of a sudden? You know?
For no reason.
For no reason. What's going
right?
On?
I was just saying, if you were one of those people that used to party, for example, right, and suddenly you don't feel compelled to party anymore, right? There are some people that will make you feel like shit. They're like, oh, you're a total buzzkill, like you're just so boring, and like you don't have to go out anymore. What's wrong with you? And it's just like in the beginning, you kind of take offense to that. You're like, whoa, wow, like am I just not? But it's like, nah, fuck that. Like it's easy how people just sort of project onto you if you decide not to do something. They're just like automatically result in just projection. Like, oh, you're just like a party pooper. You don't actually like to have fun, you know? Like, it's crazy how people will do that.
You know, that's so true. And it's funny because when that happened to me, I was like, well, I never really liked to do that shit anyway. I only did it because I was like, because my friends were going and I was kind of forced to do it, you know, if I wanted to hang out with everyone. But I never really enjoyed it when I was there. So, you know, I'm just not going to do it now.
Yeah. I mean, it's an important thing that you bring up. Like, you're no longer willing to lie to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're no longer willing to do things that you don't want to do, you know? And I think there's another aspect of that, which is that, you know, in the beginning, you were doing it because you wanted to be accepted, right? You were doing it because you wanted to be accepted by these people. Because in some ways you were relying on them for your happiness. Well, once you awaken and you go through that whole thing, you're not doing that anymore, right? You're not outsourcing, looking for your happiness. And so if you develop that own sort of like compassion and love for yourself, who gives a shit? Like, If you don't want to party, you're not going to party. Like, you're not extracting your happiness from that. You are doing what makes you happy. And if partying isn't what makes you happy, then you're not going to do that anymore, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, like going to a loud ass nightclub, listening to music I don't really like, and having somebody spill drinks on my handbag and on my shoes, and, you know, some 21-year-old drunk girl that's trying to fuck my boyfriend. No thanks, dude.
Right?
Like, no.
She steps on your airwalks. You know what, though? That you know what? You could be,
When they're
this is the thing.
new and white.
Just stepping on your feelers, Jen. This is the thing about like what you're talking about, though, right? Like, even if you weren't on a type of spiritual path, maybe there's a part of that that's worked into just aging, right? So say you're somebody that's never even picked up a book by, you know, Eckhart Tolle or read anything involving like New Age spirituality or whatever. I feel like in some unconscious way, if you don't spiritually and make the intention to evolve, like, your body and your spirit's going to do it for you, maybe in a much slower way. Because I know that when you're 30 or you're 40 years old, you naturally grow out of that shit, right? Like, you're just like, I don't want to go and do that anymore, right? Because I used to go to bars and stuff like that and clubs when I was like in my early 20s. And now I'm like in my 30s. And I'm like, even if I wasn't practicing spirituality, I still wouldn't want to go to those places, you know?
It's so
because
true.
it's loud, and it doesn't make any sense to me, right?
And this is another sensitivity thing too that you talked about earlier, how, you know, you develop new sensitivities. I, along this spiritual journey, have developed a sensitivity to super loud noises. And that I don't even really like to go to concerts much anymore if they're like too loud. Like, I definitely don't want to be in the front.
Yeah.
It's really, really bizarre. But now I have this weird aversion to loud music. And
it doesn't even have to be like a chemical, biological change. It's just like, now you're paying attention, right? Like, now you're paying attention. Like, I noticed that I developed this crazy sensitivity to caffeine. I didn't have it before. I used to be able to drink cups and cups and loads of coffee. I felt it. I never lost sensitivity to caffeine. Like, I felt it the same way every single time I had a cup. But somehow, through the course of this whole evolution of me, I developed a sensitivity to coffee. I just can't drink it anymore. It's too strong. Like, it gives me anxiety.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you, it's not like my body went through this metamorphosis where suddenly, like, I don't have the metabolism that can handle it. It's just, I'm starting to pay attention to how these things affect how I feel. And I would much rather feel peaceful than wired with coffee. I'm not saying that you shouldn't drink coffee, but, you know, I was drinking lots of coffee, you know.
Yeah, I love coffee. I just love everything about it, the way it smells, the way it tastes, the way it makes me feel. It's just, it's the nectar of the gods. It's my lifeblood.
Yeah. But everybody develops their own sensitivities, right? Just relating to what you're talking about, that happened to me. Like, there are just certain things that, like alcohol, for example, like, I used to be able to drink it, can't drink it anymore. Don't like the way it makes me feel. You know?
Yeah.
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 And
I've noticed that I've acquired different tastes for things as well, you know, and
Yeah.
I'm starting to fall out of resonance with alcohol too. Like,
Really?
as I've been drinking here lately, the last, like, I don't know, maybe the last year, I just don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy it like I used to.
Are you developing more refined flavors like goat milk and like Gouda cheeses? And like,
I love Gouda cheese.
Like liver and stuff. You know, it's interesting. Like, when you get older, suddenly you start getting this sort of like taste for weird ass things. Were you one of those people?
No, I've always had a taste for weird things though. Like, I think it's because my parents were super adventurous with food. So we, you know, as kids, like, my parents did not revolve their lives around us. Like, our life revolved around them and what they wanted to do. So if they wanted to stay out late, they didn't give a shit if it was our bedtime. If they wanted to eat something, you know, good, they didn't care if we didn't want it. If we didn't want it, then you don't eat tonight. Like, that's that, you know? So, I've always been,
it's like
really
Rocky Mountain oysters
food.
for you Monday through Friday, Jen.
Yeah.
Right? that Southern food. So yeah, I mean, things like that, there's so many different changes. Like, I remember when I became a vegetarian, and of course, you know, when you become a vegetarian, it's not mean, it's a lot more common these days, but I became vegetarian in a time where there weren't a whole lot of vegetarians. Oh, and so more often than not, you're like the only family member in your family that's a vegetarian. And all of a sudden that just kind of knocks the brakes off of the security and grounding that your family feels. And that came with its own little challenges. Like, not even just with my family. The second you actually start coming out that you're vegetarian, you automatically get people that want to spar with you with that whole thing, right? There are people that are just like, oh, so you think that you're better than us, huh? You think that you're better than us because you don't eat meat? Or they think that you're automatically one of those like really radical PETA types that will just shit on anybody that eats meat. I've never been one of those people, but you know, there are people that are like that out there. And so whenever I was always reluctant to tell anybody. I would never tell anybody I was vegan or vegetarian. They're like, but you don't eat meat. I'm like, I'm not a vegan or a vegetarian. I just eat fruits and vegetables, right? So that whole definition I try to kind of throw out the window, but it triggers. It like stuff like that triggers people. I bring that up because spirituality does the exact same thing.
Yeah, it does. And it's so funny that you say that, because I remember when I committed the fact that you were vegetarian in my memory. I remember the exact moment I was ordering food for us before, I think it was before a podcast actually. It was pho or something, or ramen. And I asked you what you wanted in it, and if you wanted beef or chicken or whatever. And you were like, yeah, I don't really eat meat. And I was like, oh shit, that's right. I totally forgot.
So, you know, my mom has been in my life my entire life because she's my mother, right? And I'm 38 years old and I still go home, right, during holidays, or I still go visit my mother very often and spend time with her. She still tries to make me plates of food that have meat. She's like, "Oh, you want some of this, right?" I'm like, "No, Mom, I've been vegetarian for like the last 8 years." And she's like, "Oh, well, I didn't know if you were still doing that whole thing anymore," or whatever. It's like it's hard for people to accept, and I understand why my mom was feeling that way, because she's your mom. Like, she wants to feel like she can take care of you, and there aren't a whole lot of mothers out there that have mastered the art of vegetarian dining. So it's like they do what they can, right? So in some ways, I actually ended up feeling bad, because it's like your mother has these sort of go-to things that she wants to make for you because she's your mother. All of a sudden, you're telling her you don't eat those things, and they're like, "Well, what do I do then? You want me to just make you a salad?"
Make you.
Yeah. So that's a whole struggle. I mean, and I've always been one of those people that have been really compassionate and understanding. I've never tried to impose my, vegetarian views on other people, but you'll notice in the same way that you experience when you get into spirituality, there are just going to be people that are triggered by it. They don't understand what it is. They feel intimidated by it. They think that you're one of those people that just think that you're better than they are. And there's a whole lot of reasons why people feel that way, and I don't blame them, but you just have to remain true to how you feel. And if they're not biological family, allow those relationships to just drop away, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
In some cases, I even let biological family members fall away,
I mean, if you have to do that, I mean, it's definitely not preferred. There seems to be more of an obligation to try and make it work, but if you have to do that, you got to do it, And, speaking of like those type of friendships and family, I noticed that I was, as far as like, how relationships change after awakening, I was less interested in nurturing friendships that lacked substance and meaning, right? Mm-hmm. You'll notice even like, even in spiritual circles, that people can look or come across as spiritual people, but still behave in a way that's inauthentic and unreal, like going back to kind of authenticity and meaning, like, so what if I'm one of those people that wants to have a deep conversation, like a deep, meaningful conversation? Like when I sit down with somebody, like I want to know how they're feeling. I want to know what their experience in life is like. And that can be just triggering in and of itself, because there are a lot of people that don't want to share those feelings, right? That vulnerability is very intimidating for them. Like they feel triggered by that. A lot of people spend a lot of time creating walls around themselves. And so when somebody like me comes up to them and I'm like, no, I don't care about what you do for a living. I don't care about how much money you make. Like, who are you really as a person? Like, how is your life going? And you just either get somebody that wants to be engaged, or you get somebody that's just like, who the fuck is this weird guy? being intrusive, wanting to know about me, and like all of a sudden it becomes a bad thing. You're just like, no, like I'm not playing that game with you. Like I just want to have a real conversation with you. You know, like it became less interested in, you know, conversations that lacked substance or meaning, you know, like those things aren't important to me. Did you ever go through things like that? Do you go through things like that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I actually went through something really, really hard recently. A very, very close friend, somebody that I considered like a family member, and it took years. I mean, it was years and years and years of this person and I like kind of falling out of resonance, and yeah, and I just was struggling because I wanted to hold them into my life like with a death grip, you know, just did not want to let them go. Because I was just kind of like dwelling and living in the past and the good times and this weird, like, I don't know. I had some sort of spiritual connection,
Yeah.
and I actually had to cut cords. You know, I had to do a full meditation and cut cords with this person to release them from my life. And since I've done that, I've felt so much better. But that did not come without a ton of guilt, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I love this person and I wanted to keep them around. But at some point you just have to realize when it's time to move on, and we're in different places in our lives, and we are on such different frequencies that the gap is just widening and widening and widening, and it was going to happen. It was going to happen eventually, and it was going to happen no matter what. Like, I wasn't going to be able to stop it.
Yeah. It's a really important thing that you bring up. I mean, that type of experience, like when those relationships or those friendships drop away, it isn't just like they drop away and you go on living your life. There is a grieving period that happens.
Oh, for
I
sure.
would call that quality that you go through a part of like the dark night of the soul experience, because a lot of people feel alone after they lose all those people. They're like, right. I'm having to give up people that I've spent all my life with, people that I've had really amazing experiences with. I'm having to give those people up. Right. And so the grieving process will take place. I mean, I've gone through that. I mean, you don't know that you're in a toxic relationship with somebody until you really start getting serious about your own spirituality. And once you do, you start realizing how really toxic people are in your life. And that can involve you excommunicating somebody that you've held so close to your heart in your life, your entire life, or the time that you've known them. And that can be excruciatingly painful to give up, right? Because you have a lot of things to kind of give up too, trauma bonds, codependent traits.
Yep.
Like you're doing a whole lot of healing by giving these relationships up. So it's not an easy process all the time. But the one thing that keeps you going, like the one thing that keeps you dedicated to your practice, is that you start to care so much more about your peace and the love that you have for yourself and the love that you have for the right people. That supersedes any sort of toxic behavior that you could ever put up with in your life. And that is what keeps you dedicated to being alone if you have to, right? Like nothing is more important than your peace, or nothing is more important than being able to cultivate and nurture this love that you have in yourself. And you may be alone for a while, but what'll happen eventually, if you're really operating from that place, is you'll start to notice all of the right people coming into your life, right?
That maybe is the magic.
Yeah, you'll get rid of maybe 200 friends will turn into 4 really important friends. And more often than not, those 4 really important friends, you didn't even notice that they were there the entire time, right? Because you have this entire group of people that were distracting you from really seeing the true meaning in your relationship. So when that 200 friends turns into 4 friends, you're just like, wow, I can't even believe that I had this type of connection with you. So yeah, you may be alone for a while, but eventually the right people will come in.
You know, and that is so true. The issue with that is you are wasting your time and your energy on the wrong people, on these toxic people. And as soon as you move them out, as soon as you clear them out of your energy, that's whenever you start to vibrate with people that are on your level. And then all of a sudden, you know, you either meet a new person, or like you said, there's somebody that's been in your life that you become closer to. You have to move those toxic people out to level up, to get those better relationships coming in.
Yeah. Like I don't get how there are people out there that like having hundreds and hundreds of friends, and that's cool. I question though how real and legitimate those relationships are, right?
No,
If
they're
we're going
not.
off
It's
of like
just a bunch of
Dunbar's theory of
acquaintances.
like 100 people, like your mind can't even fathom having that many people. But, like I question how real and authentic some of those relationships are. But when those people started to sort of leave my life, it makes you realize how much of your energy you were putting in, even into bad friendships and bad relationships. When those things stop and you're able to dedicate your life to your family and maybe those 5 friends, you have so much more of yourself to give them because you're not giving
Yeah,
it to the wrong people, right?
you're absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you realize who your friends are by the love that they share, right? You realize who aren't your friends by the sort of transactional nature of their behavior towards you. Like it's a very simple thing if you really start paying attention to it. It's like you meet somebody, you can feel whether or not they have the capacity to love by whether or not they
Mm-hmm.
pay attention and see you as a person. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, someone can tell me that they're, and I'm talking about even in spiritual communities too, like you can still find people that are disingenuous within the community. Like you can tell me that you're spiritual all day long. And in some ways, it doesn't really mean a whole lot to me because, it reminds me of this quote by Jiddu Krishnamurti where he says that the word is not the thing, right? You can say that you're loving and not be loving,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, for sure.
Spirituality for me is not driven by what people say. It's driven by what people do and how they show up for you. And once you start paying attention to that, not listening to what people say, because you'll notice there are a lot of people that will tell you what you want to hear. Once you start paying attention to what people do, like how they show up in your relationship, that's when you start to notice where the love is and where the love's not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't just talk about it. You got to be about it.
You got it. You got to be about it, right? Letting go of friends that no
Right.
longer serve you isn't the only hurdle that we experience when we awaken. The second hurdle for me is also letting go of friends we make, like I said, within the spiritual community as a result of our awakening. Because you'll find, just like I said, just as many transactional friendships in that community as you would in regular life. And I asked myself this,
For
I've
sure.
really pondered this because I thought in the beginning, once I found myself into that community, that all the people that I meet were going to be just like me. And more often than not, they are, right? But I just thought to myself, well, why is this? Why do we still find these types of people in the community? And I think that because enlightenment tends to create this really unique excitement in others that inspires them to want to share it with others, right? And it isn't that sharing of it that becomes an issue. What becomes an issue is when people begin this journey of wanting to monetize it. And this is where I've experienced a lot of my bulk of these type of relationships is that you have people that want to be your friend only because they want you to do a sound bath for the retreat. You have these people that want to be your friends because they want to put together a retreat or they want to put together some course or they want you to collaborate with them on something that involves charging other people. And I get it, that happens, but there seems to be this little tinge, this tinge of inauthenticity with some of these people because when I turn them down or I say they don't want to collaborate, I don't hear from them again, right? Or it's like
No.
I do collaborate with them and we're like best friends. And then when I don't, suddenly they're not around anymore. So it's like you really have to
Right.
pay attention to how people operate because even if you're in the spiritual community, you're going to find those types of relationships and you have to also allow those relationships to just fade away and focus on the people in your life that will be loving. And in some cases, to be honest, some of my greatest friends aren't even in the spiritual community. These are just people that have just maybe have a loving nature and, they're not trying to just create $5,000 retreats in like, some remote place of like Mount Shasta. These are just regular everyday people. Like you can find friends anywhere. Doesn't have to just be in the
Agreed.
community that you're in. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things about this whole thing, right? And I think just being true to who you are and creating healthy boundaries for yourself, you'll know what it is that you will allow and what you won't allow in your space. And you'll know the reason why you're letting those relationships go and the reason why those relationships are no longer valid in your life, right? You'll find that you'll find that people drop away, not because you don't vibe with them or because you push them away. In fact, at least for me, enlightenment allows us to more readily accept all of who somebody is. Like I'm not going around saying like somebody has to think of life in the exact way that I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because I'm a spiritual person, I don't expect any type of special treatment from somebody, and I don't expect anybody to believe what it is that I feel. What it did was it allowed me to accept everybody, right? It allowed me to accept everybody within reason, of course, right? The question isn't whether or not they will. How would I say it? I think enlightenment allows us to more readily accept all of who somebody is. The question is whether or not they will accept all of who you have become, right? Sometimes they don't. Naturally, they fall away. It's a question of whether or not they will accept you. And if they don't, they fall away. It's not like we go pushing people out of our lives. It's whether or not people are willing to accept you.
I mean, there's assholes in every form.
Right?
It's true.
Yeah. And that's what it's all, it's just all about this recognition, right? This radical recognition, because you really care. You really care about what you subject yourselves to. And I want to end it on this, unless you had anything else that you wanted to say, Jen.
No, I think we kind of said it. You know what? I do have one more thing to say.
Yeah.
Because I experienced this myself, having guilt about those relationships that have fallen away and feeling like, oh, should I give that person a call? Like, is it up to me to, keep this going? And yeah, I mean, sure, I could give them a call, but what is that going to do for either of us, by keeping the friendship going, So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to cut ties whenever it's time. And it doesn't mean it has to be some dramatic event. It's like, we're no longer friends. It doesn't have to be like that. You can just let somebody kind of fizzle away and fade off into the sunset and still be friends. I have a ton of friends that will reach out to me randomly and, that I haven't talked to in months. And then when we talk, it's like, one day hasn't gone by. And that's how you know when those are true and real friendships. If you run into an old friend and you have nothing to say to each other and it just feels awkward, then, there's a reason why you're not in communication anymore. So be open-minded. Don't be afraid to change.
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, it allowed me to just accept everybody for who they are and where they're at in their life. I have friends that I only talk to like once a month, friends that I talk to maybe like once every other month. And if they are your true friends, and they understand you completely, time can go by. And I have those friends. Like a month can go by, 2 months can go by. When you finally meet up again, it's like you never ever left, right? Yep. They accept you for who you are. They understand that life happens. And they just want, in that moment, to enjoy life with somebody. And they'll just meet you where you're at, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how I sort of try and approach it. It's like, I will accept you for who you are if you can accept me for who I am. And it doesn't mean that we have to be perfect. It doesn't mean that you have to, wake up at 4 a.m. and do a 4 a.m. sort of sadhana. It doesn't mean that you have to like go to sound baths and do all that kind of stuff. You just have to be like a loving, caring person, right? And
a good human being on the earth. That's
good human being on the earth. And all the people that aren't in my life as a result of my practice isn't because I pushed them out. It's because they couldn't accept me, you know? Like they couldn't accept me, or they couldn't, pass the sort of barrier or the wall that they've created to allow themselves to be vulnerable and real and like deep,
Once the spiritual door is open, there's no turning back. It's not like you can go back to sleep. That's not what happens. So whenever you're communicating with people who are asleep and you're awake, it's, there's a big contrast, and people who are still asleep and are not ready to wake up, they need to do that on their own time. And, maybe in the future you're part of facilitating their awakening, who knows, but maybe you're not. And if you're not, that's okay. That's okay.
100%. And, and also wanted to say, it's not like I don't fall asleep every once in a while. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like if you have an ego inside of your body, which everybody does, like every once in a while, you're going to not pay attention, or every once in a while, you're going to fall asleep and do something stupid, right? Yeah. Every once in a while that happens. And that's sort of like spiritual awakening, once you become more aware, those things just start happening less frequently. You know, after a certain period of time, maybe you can fine tune that and you can be really, really, you know, good at staying awake. But I just wanted to just talk about the fact that like we're all kind of essentially the same. You know what I mean? Like it's all like what Ram Dass calls this sort of question of walking each other home. Like I think most people want to be awake. I think that maybe people just don't have the tools in order to, you know, get to that place. But that's the whole journey, you know, that's the whole journey that they go on. Like some people it'll take them 3 or 4 lifetimes to get to that point. Some people it takes them 1 lifetime. I mean, it's all happening, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's this
just
quote
accepting
that I
someone
wanted.
else's journey, for sure.
Yeah. There's this quote that I obviously really, very, very love because Adyashanti is one of like the masters of this whole thing that we're talking about. If you guys have ever heard of Adyashanti, he has a really amazing book called Emptiness Dancing. He also has another book called The End of Your World. And he says, it's not that enlightenment does anything to you. It simply shows you the nature of reality. And when we finally experience it for ourselves, we have no choice but to change exactly what you said, Jen. We can no longer remain asleep in unconscious behavior because we become hyper aware of everything that prevents us from experiencing our true selves, right? So it's not like enlightenment does anything to you. It just shows you, it pulls the veil out. You're able to see everything for what it really is. And once you see it, you're like, holy shit, like how could you possibly go back the same?
Why would you want
You know
to?
what I'm saying? Like, why would you even
Yeah.
want to? You can't do that. I mean, you could, but you would be lying to yourself. Once that door is open, it'd be really, really difficult to close it if you can even get it closed at all. But yeah, I would just say, you know, if you're on your spiritual journey, you know, keep going. If those people sort of fall out of your life, it's okay. It's a part of it. You know what? You're not the only one going through that. I still go through that. I don't think it's like a linear thing. I think that it's a continuous thing that happens.
It is.
You know, you can spend an entire life watching the people that come into your life drop away, but it's a part of the whole thing. You're not alone in that sort of dark night of the soul experience. This whole thing is a journey and it's constantly evolving. So if you ever feel like you're alone, trust me, you're not. I go through the same type of stuff that we're talking about right now. Just like Jen says with her friends, right? It happens. Anyways, it happens. Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in to Divine Nobodies podcast. Thank you guys for tuning into the show. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, feel free to leave us a review. Let us know what you think of the podcast. Also, if you're on YouTube, we record these. If you go into the description of the podcast, you can find the video if you want to see us on video. Like and subscribe if you can if you're on YouTube. You'd rather look at it that way. If you guys want to reach out to us, you can reach out to us on Instagram. And that's where we post some of our content. Or if you want to be on the podcast, let us know. We would love to have you if you have a really amazing story that you wanted to share or just some wisdom that you wanted to share. We'd be open to that as well. But yeah, until next time, friends, namaste.
Namaste, friends.